Mic check. 1, 2.
Tom, use your word.
Hey, you.
That's original freedom.
It's quite a ubiquitous topic as well.
Got to use the word.
I did. Wait for it.
There's no
wait
build
for
up there. Yeah, there's no wait for it.
It just is. It
I
was
don't like when
very
it sneaks up
appropriate.
on
It was
me.
appropriately used. Today on the Original Freedom Podcast, we're going to talk about the ubiquitous topic of leadership. Yeah?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's good enough open as any. Welcome to the Original Freedom Podcast. Good to have you along today. And Tom and Nate and myself are back on location in Raleigh, North Carolina. Lovely, cool day. And beating around what we're going to talk about today, we came up with a topic that we feel certain we got a lot of experience in, both in the private sector, the military world, the NFL, from locker rooms to talks to team rooms to executive boardrooms. What is it that we have experienced personally and or being out and about learning from others on what's worked, what doesn't work, what's important to some, isn't important to others. And I would also say understanding the job market and the times that we're in. It is a time where employees care about what leaders think, what companies stand for, and really the bigger picture. It's not a world where you get to just tell people what to do anymore. The workforce has massive amounts of opportunity and choice. So garnering followership, building loyalty is the name of the game as it relates to keeping your human capital. Right, and Dan Walker taught us that, that word. It's like human capital. This is a game of human capital, and leadership is the key to all things related to human capital. And that said, topics leadership, and let's kick it off, Tommy. Just if we were to say, hey, if we're going to have a talk about leadership, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is when I was first in the military, approached with the question of what a leader is. And I didn't think about this until you just asked me.
Right on.
But it was, I was a corporal. Yeah, that's right.
Meanest sumbitch
Mean
in
corporal.
the Army.
In the 80 twice.
80 twice.
Yeah, and my platoon sergeant was a Vietnam veteran, and he said I'd finished PLDC, right? Been in Ranger School, PLDC. I'm a leader. And he's like, okay, hey, what's the, as a leader, as a non-commissioned officer, what is it? And I was like, I'd been PLDC, man. Like, I know. Mission, health and welfare of the troops. And he's like, yeah. What
Good answer.
What does that mean? It's like, obviously the mission is the mission, right? That's priority. That's the number one. It's like, what's health and welfare of the troops? And I'm like, beans, bullets. I know how many kids they have. I got it filled out on my team leader my little 3x5 card that has all their personal information. And he's like, yeah, no, dickhead. And that's what he said, and I was like, okay. And it says, no, it means that you provide and give them the ability to survive and thrive in combat. Big difference than beans and bullets. And so from that moment on, that was like my initial change into like, whoa, like this is a freaking big deal. Like everybody that's below me, like that's what I'm responsible for.
Yeah.
And so that was my initial, when it came to real leadership, not all the stuff that I thought that it was and everything, and especially in the context of the military, especially at that time. That was my entry into, hey, what a real leader in the military provides, and that was my initial thing that came to mind to answer your question.
But that's what stuck with you as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
forever, like to date, like right now,
Right. So now
combat has changed, not in the military and everything, and nor were we always in combat, especially. That was 92. When that conversation happened, it was, and then after 9/11, all the combat, it really applied, obviously. And, but then getting out, principally, it's the exact same thing. How do the people below me survive, and not just survive, right? Because that's
Well, that was a key word.
that
on
was
the
a
other
key word
part.
whenever it comes to actual physical combat. So obviously not in that context anymore, but to survive the market space, survive the trials and tribulations that come within companies and that kind of stuff. But to thrive in in environments that aren't conducive to thriving, meaning a tough market, a startup, operation, that kind of stuff, but you still can't lose your values.
Running a rehab, running a chemical dependency
Or
facility. Right? It's like
principally it always applies.
tough place to thrive.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's just again what we get from I learned it in the military. I know they teach it outside of the military also, but it's such a strong context. The simple thing of leaders eat last. Those little things like everybody below me comes first. Like my job as a leader is to take care of those below me and ensure that they're doing their job and what they're supposed to be doing. But my fight's not with them. My fight is always higher. I fight up, take care of down. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of good basic foundational stuff just kind of fell out there. It's interesting that it was a civilian that wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last because he heard about that theory.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's mindset as well. So it's just a simple mindset of, and it was like all
Pure
these
mindset.
simple things. But it also, to me, brings a stark contrast in what's available out here in the private sector. Whenever Tom said he went to PLDC, that's Primary Leadership and Development course. The military invests, that's 30 days of pure investment in leadership
And how to
be a leader, how
at
to counsel.
at the base level.
At the base level, right? And then they go on to invest BNOC 2 months, ANOC for us 6 months, Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer course, Sergeant Major's Academy a year, right? So there's massive amounts of investments on teaching people how to lead humans.
Yep.
And conversely, over the last 10 years, going on 10 years that I've been in the private sector, and you yourself as well, it's like the amount of time invested out here is not the same
No.
in teaching people how to lead.
Right.
And the cost associated with it is a reason, and the time associated with it, and so that's one thing I've seen where there's moments in time where I'm like, why is this such like profound? This is simple. This is day one, week one of PLDC.
Yeah.
Yet they haven't
It's not
learned
taught.
it. It's not taught.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
we didn't come up with it.
No,
we were taught
exactly. It's nothing new. It's all, we just like you did. The beauty of the story you told was that you went and got the foundational principles of leadership, education, right? The book, the head knowledge, and then you had an old salty warrior look at you and say that through wisdom, this is what all that means, and he simplified it for you, right?
Yeah.
That's anyone who's a master of anything is someone who can simplify. It's like, you can say all that, but this is what we're here to do.
And then the next step is implementation. Like I had the education, I had the mentorship, that helped me, like you said, what that education really meant. And then it was now up to me to implement that. Again, under guidance, which is another thing that we found, lacking, in outside of the military. Like number one, they don't educate folks as well as that piece of it. But then also there's not really that hardcore mentorship. And it's not like all that was perfect in the military. We had shit leaders, at times. So I mean,
It's like you do out here, at times.
But you had in the military, you didn't have the option of like, okay, I'm out. I'm leaving. This guy sucks. I'm out. So you had to not suffer. You had to. Well, yeah, you had to suffer that for 2 years.
You didn't have choice.
You didn't have a choice, but then it's like, hey, but you couldn't. We didn't ever stay in suffering. So it's like, okay, how do I change my mindset? It's like, okay, I'm just focused on my piece of the pie. This guy sucks. That means I have to be an even better leader. Well, I didn't even know what that meant. So it was trial and error, and then like, all of that stuff. How do I go from being a peer to now a leader? You know what I mean? And then moving up the ranks is like, okay, I'm a low-level leader. Now I'm a mid-level leader. Now I'm a high-level. I mean, all of those are different.
Right, and each phase, each step up, there comes a new challenge. And you and I, having both done this in the military, in the private sector, it doesn't matter. Every time you are responsible for the outcome of the overall mission, whether it be in a startup,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. You have humans that you're responsible for. It just changes everything. And the mindset that you bring to each leadership opportunity, and it is an opportunity, right? Because leaders have great influence. You don't, that's what I tell people that we work with. It's like, hey, you don't get a pass on how what you do affects everyone else. Like, well, I've had people say, well, I didn't mean to be this. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it's back to
Second,
energy
third order
101,
effect.
conservation of energy. It can't be destroyed, nor can it be made. It is conserved. So leaders conserve their energy into those they lead, period. And so like the level of responsibility that comes with that, and that changes. So if, you go from running a 20-person shop to boom, moving up to the executive level, now you're responsible for 300. The beliefs that you have around leadership and the importance of relationships, the importance of potentially behavioral changes or conversations you have to have, the way you look at friendships that you now are leading, like it's super complex.
Yeah.
And private sector way more complex, because these are people that live together, hang out, party together, and then move from that into bang, I'm in charge of you. Right? So the mindset, and the mindset of what? A set of beliefs that you have around why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing it have to change if you want to be successful. Right? Because what got you here won't get you there. It's true. So when you find yourself somewhere new, and if you're using the same old tools, well, then that's the problem. But if we could, I'd like to dive into, for as much consulting as we've done and teaching as we've done, the question always comes up around, hey, what's the most important characteristic or trait of a leader? And I think I'd like to ask you what yours is, and then I'll share mine, and then talk about why it's important to understand that there's no right or wrong answer, yet the way that you think about this will impact you.
Yeah.
So what's the most important characteristic or trait of a leader for you, knowing that we have to have a lot?
Yeah.
Take
There's
just
a whole
one.
bunch in there, but it's the single one for me is I know that the leader above me, which then makes me my important thing, is that they care. You know what I mean? That hey, shit hits the fan, they've got my back. You know what I mean? That hey, they care about me and my family, and know my needs. But at the end of the day, I know that they care about me personally. At my direct leader, maybe one above that. Obviously higher than that. They can't know 300 people's names, but my direct reports, in the outside of the military world, would be is like, hey, I know that no matter what, this person cares about me. That's the number one trait for me, and therefore that's what I looked above, because that's my perception and my definition of leadership, which only applies to me. But then in turn, like that's the kind of leader that I am to those below, or attempt to be.
Right on.
So caring would be that one for me. What about you?
For me, and because I ask so many of this people this question, they always turn around on me, as they should. And for me, I'd written about it, I'd thought about it, and looked back through leaders that taught me the most through demonstration. And for me, it's decisiveness. And the reason why is that, to me, that's what, as a leader, that's what I'm judged on. That's what all leaders end up being judged on. And decisions create action, and those actions create consequences, and then those consequences is what I'm judged on, the outcome. And if the outcome is good, then the credit goes to the team, and if the outcome is bad, because I'm responsible and I'm a person of integrity, then I'm accountable for the failure. But it always starts just from a decision. And because of my experience, to me, the most suffering occurs on teams due to leaders that aren't decisive, and that's timely and mission focused. That's implied. But for me, decisiveness is a big deal, and because of that, like you, pretty sure Nate can attest to stuff's going on. Like, I want him to be decisive, and I have to stay aware of that, just like maybe you do, because of what's the right word? preference.
Yeah.
Right. It's a leadership
It's
preference.
just preference.
It's a preference. In that I enjoy when people are decisive with me because that's how I like to be. Conversely, Nate takes more time to think than I do, which is a good thing that I've had to learn to appreciate.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I would say what this has helped me, even us working back together more, is the right team, especially executive level leadership teams, or anywhere there's a lot of leaders, has leaders with different strengths. Right? Because Nate, in those moments now that I've learned through our open conversation and dialogue, it's like, okay, he's just thinking. Because to me, indecisiveness.
Yeah, you interpret it as indecisive.
Yeah,
it's like,
he's
strategizing.
That's right. He's making his decision-making process is different than mine.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, because to me, it's indicative of you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
Right.
Which then gets me on the muscle at times. And it's like, no, it's not that he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just thinking.
Yeah.
And so, not part of this. It is actually, because as leaders, you have to stay focused. I don't ask people what their greatest weakness is. I ask them what their greatest strength is, because that kept unchecked. And I think we align on this. I don't know. My greatest strength kept unchecked will turn into a weakness, whereas I will become over decisive.
Right.
Right. I'm not sure, but people that are caring at times can care too much, so to speak, and be blinded by the care. So all these things can turn into the opposite as well. And this is also the stochastic nature of this conversation actually lends itself to leadership. It's complex.
Yeah.
Caring, decisive, some people would say inspiring, and I would say your answer is your answer. And Tom brought up the point when we were in the military, if we had a commander or sergeant major or team leader or team sergeant, whoever show up, it wasn't like we had the option to hop on LinkedIn.
Yeah, find a good job.
I'd like to find a better leader to go serve under the next 2 years. It was like, wow, I have this for 2 years. Now, for those of you out there in the private sector, it's like pure choice, back to original freedom. He or she who's the greatest choice is the freest because they're where they want to be. I think it's a gift to have that level of freedom that, hey, if you have a poor leader, ask yourself, why are you still there? And because possibility lays outside everywhere.
Yeah, and just like you said, just being at choice is like, hey, yeah, this guy or this gal sucks as a leader, but I'm choosing to stay in this job, and I'm going to figure out new ways of, just like we did whenever we didn't have the choice. To me, because it's not just because otherwise, it's always that fine balance where it's going to be this cycle of, hey, good leaders, bad leaders, and stuff. But I can be at choice. Even though like now, like you said, being out, I have the option of being like, see ya. But also it's like, nah, this is a good deal for me. This is just a sucky kind of aspect of it right now. It's like, how can I thrive in this environment? And until I reach that point of suffer, like this sucks, like I can't win here. I can't spin it. I can't convince myself that this is good. Like, hey, it's like, I know it, that I need to leave now. But I think there's value I know there was always value in the lessons learned from us when we had to work for poor leaders.
Sure.
We learned great skills. We learned great skills of like, okay, how do I not be all down in the dumps? This guy sucks. Have a bad attitude. Nitpick him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, be that person. How do I be like a good soldier still? And but also thrive and have the people below me thrive, even though this is going on. It's.
Well, I'd say in that situation, the ones we had to endure.
That's a better word. Endure.
Endure, because there's not choice. We couldn't choose. The two choices I would say that I often went to was, one is how do I make sure that when this person leaves, that it's a no-brainer that I'm getting that seat. And once I get that seat, I'm going to do what it is I know needs to be done. And I had that happen. The other one is, to your point, it's like, how do I control my sphere of influence? Because in our world, it was back to taking care of the boys. It's like, how do I make sure that I'm the only one that has to deal with this?
Right.
And that they get to thrive. None of this bullshit is going to get down to them. It's my job, your point. It's like, hey, I'm shielding and fighting, so to speak,
Yeah.
up because I'm shielding and taken care of down, right?
Yeah.
And that can be done out here as well in the private sector, because there's plenty of times, and I've seen it now, and I've worked with enough people that I've had people say to me, well, I'm staying here right now to take care of the team.
Right.
Fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Just understand that you are
Yes.
choosing to endure some poor leadership, let's say for a time, because you know it's going to change, or you're in the why is that you're choosing to take care of your people. Like, these are friends, these are your followership, that literally, if you leave, are going, like, harm's going to be done. Their life's going to get shitty, and it's like that's admirable. Yet, to Tom's point, up until a point, what that comes down to, until I got to break my own rules, which
Yes,
means
intolerable.
I'm living incongruent, right?
Yeah.
I'm putting up with things or enduring things that I know I don't do that. So, but until then, it's absolutely taking care of people, whatever your purpose is. Just know that the choice is always there to lead, because it's not about what everyone else is doing. Because there's times too in consulting, I get folks always like picking apart, like, hey, this person, like, hey, what are you doing? I've even had people say, hey, well, what if they don't use the leadership code after you leave? It's like, what if you do? So back to leadership is a very personal thing. We are responsible from, our actions at the beginning throughout every day, whether we quote unquote, because you brought up before we started talking on the topic of leadership as it relates to family and friends. Right. And so there's things that work and are difficult or hard in the military. There's things that work that are difficult or hard at the executive level. And then, like, what about when we come home?
Yeah. Like, leading at home, is a different dynamic. But for me, what comes up right from the beginning is what we talk about too, is don't confuse being in a position of authority as being a good leader. You know what I mean? So you're in the authority, at least. So, like, just in my example, it's like, hey, by authority, I'm a husband. You know what I mean? So that means I have husband authorities, and I'm a father, so I have father authorities. And you know what I mean? And it comes up to that piece of, are people following me because they have to or because they want to? And there's never a perfect balance in that, especially being in leadership. Sometimes it will be that, but for my mindset as a leader is like, hey, what are they doing? Because in the dynamic of home is much like being out of the military, because we have our military piece, and then being out, since we've been out, and but because they don't have to do what I say. I mean, they can begrudgingly doing it, give me like, okay, all right. Yeah, sure.
And
Yeah,
that's
Dad.
usually that's a one-time, two-time deal.
Yeah. So it's like, wow, it's a different skill set. It's a different position. It's a different
Mindset.
well, different, maybe. You know what I mean? And for me, at times, there's different techniques. Obviously, different techniques, but it's the same for me. Is the same kind of mindset that I was like in the military. Very different techniques, because I got told really quick, like, hey, yeah, we're not in the fucking military. Yeah, we're not your soldiers.
You're not your soldiers. I'm not one of
And
your
then whenever it
students.
got said that to me, I was like, that's true. Now what?
Lord,
You know what I'm saying? It's like,
God.
it's like, okay, that's a true statement. And I have no other techniques. So again, that came back to, as a leader, okay, how do I educate myself? What do I know about becoming a leader? Right? How do I become a leader? Well, first I got to get educated. Well, how do I get educated? I read books, and how to be a dad, how to be, women are from Mars and men are from Venus and what the fuck ever, you know what I mean? It's like, a lot of it is BS, you know what I mean? But there's nuggets and all of that. The bigger point is that I was seeking to educate myself on being a leader in a different kind of environment. And so, and again, the different dynamic for me versus all the time in the military, is back to all the conversations that we have, is there's many things. Someone can be a great leader in the military and they totally suck in the civilian world, because it's out of the context of what the military holds, and it's a different set of rules.
And the rules, yeah.
Yeah, because that was my, my first one outside of the military, being in charge of people and everything. It's like, well, yeah, this person needs to get fired. And it's like, well, yeah, you're probably right. But if we fire them, they're going to be gone. You know, I'm like, yeah. And it's like, and then they're going to sue us. I'm like, what? Like, nuh-uh. Like, that's not how it works. Oh, yeah, that's how it works. I'm like, so again, back to the home kind of thing. It's like, okay, I don't have a technique for that. So what do? Getting back to education, I can keep running around trying to use the same rules, and and the only person that's ridiculous is me, you know, because everybody else is just watching this idiot spin around, you know. And so again, it comes back to the education and mentorship. You know, I mean, that's a term that's thrown around a lot, but truly, I see someone that, you know, is successful in this position I'm trying to be in. It's like, okay, hey, what do you do? And then not do exactly what they said to do, but then take that information, spin it into my stuff, you know, and like, okay, how do I implement that? But it's, you know, and it goes back to perspective. Like, there's plenty of people that are totally comfortable with like their professional life and their leadership there, and everybody thinks there's a rock star and that's awesome and they're super successful and everything. Yeah, and their kids fucking can't stand them. You know, some people were good with that, and I'm not judging that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, to each his own. Like, you know, but for me, you know what I mean? It's always been like that. I'm not okay with that. Definitely screw it up all the time, daily. But it's like, but it's always making the progress. Yep, don't do that again. You know, and so anyway, I was on a little roll there.
No, you're on a good
So-
roll, and there's two things that came out to me that you said. One of the things you said was Mars and Venus book, and I know you actually have a bit of a story around that
Yeah.
that I think I would love to hear you share, because it ties into the other thing I heard you say, which is you went and bought a book on leadership in and around parenting, or leadership in and around this, and you went and talked to people and asked them how did they do it, and then you've caveated all of that with, and I didn't do exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Because what I heard was you went and got a lot of data, and then you said, for my situation, for my family, for my wife, this from that data, I'd like to try it in this way.
Yeah.
If you'd pull on that thread.
Oh yeah, man. Because you know, like for an example, read the husband wife kind of book, you know, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is what it is. And then what I found out, and I tried some of those techniques, and it didn't work. You know, I'm like, I read this education, you know, and it's like, what the hell, you know. So then my lesson learned afterwards is like, hey, there's not a book on Lori. That's my wife. There's no book. I mean, I got to get educated, and I got to see all these techniques that I don't know. But it's like, so so I just need to know them more. Hey, there's not a book on my sons. You know what I mean? There's a book of how to raise sons, and there's a shitload of them. You know what I mean? But it's, again, what you were saying is like, I'm not looking for someone to give me the answer. At one time in my life I was, you know, and then I found out that wasn't the answer for me.
Yeah.
Is like, but what I do is I gather all the intelligence, you know, I gather all the education and all that piece, translate it into what works for me, and then try those kind of techniques, whether it's being a father, being an entrepreneur, being all of that stuff. You know, I mean, I have to make it my own. Yeah, but it goes right back to what we started the story out with. You know, I went to PLDC, I got the education, had the mentor. You know what I mean? There's like, and then he didn't tell me what to do. He just told me what I needed to do, not how I needed to do it.
Yeah.
That was up to me, which was another just blessing for me from my leaders. You know, they didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think. You
And
know,
why?
Yeah, and why? Like, hey, yeah, because you got to figure this out. You know, and so that was, I think that touched on, you know, everything.
I mean, you brought it full circle. You know, and what came back to me is that whether it be at home, whether it be in an office, or whether it be in front of a platoon, squadron, team, whatever, the way to check your barometer in life on if you're leading people, which means you have followers, is to ask yourself, in a professional environment, if you got up and left today, who on your team would go with you? If you're in a family environment or friend environment, if you say, I'm taking a vacation somewhere. I'm going to do this. Who chooses to go with me?
Yeah.
It's still followership is the key requirement and
Absolutely.
indicator of successful leadership.
Yep.
Right. The key indicator is that, and I've reminded folks of that, and I used to remind myself of that. And some of the greatest compliments I ever got paid as a leader was primarily whenever I had the troop out at work, and guys that I put through the Q course or guys that I would be in group with said, I want to come there because I want to work for you. I want to be led by you. Or if you leave, I'm going with you, Scotty.
Yeah.
Those statements, right? And
everything.
And then that's no different than whenever my kids are excited to go on vacation with me. They're excited to sit down and shoot a game of pool with me. It's like I know they want to be there. And so as leaders, ask yourself at home, with your friends, at work, if you were to put the announcement up, I'm leaving, who's going? Be honest, and then you got your answer on how leadership is. And if I do the same to myself, I'll get my answer.
Yeah. And it came to mind, sorry, Nate, and then it came to mind, because we haven't even chimed in with you. It came to mind for me what Derek had said, a buddy of mine, that his dad had told him. And that is that I will risk you hating me. This was father and son. He said, I will risk you hating me than to send you into this world unprepared. Wow.
Boom.
Yeah, man. And I again, that was third-hand information from me. And because what was coming up for me when you were talking is that, we're talking about all the kind of the feel good and the good side of what we're saying as leadership. With that, even me being as caring as I can be and knowing people are appreciated and all that stuff, there comes a time as leaders, like we always talked about, especially in high performance organizations, where leadership, is like an EKG, where it's kind of just up and down, and all of a sudden there's a spike, and that spike is decision time. Yep. Because, hey, a decision has to be made. Hey, make that decision. Not everybody's going to like it. It's impossible, in my experience, for everyone to be like, oh, awesome. Some of them are going to be like, awesome, but then others are going to be upset, but again, if I've done my job, they should be like, man, I'm pissed that you just made that decision. I don't understand it. But I trust you.
It might be they do understand it. They don't agree with it, because
either way, maybe both.
Well, and I will happily speak on your behalf in this case, in that you make that decision, you let them know why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So
every decision is a why.
So you make that spike, right, is a leadership decision, because someone has to take that leader's responsible. Mm-hmm. So, and a responsible leader that cares, to your point, made the decision, explains to the people why. And the reason why not everyone's going to like it, and it's impossible, is because that decision is made around mission focus and the greater good.
Yeah.
So not everyone's part of the greater good, but within the greater good, there's going to be people that don't like it.
Yeah.
Right. But as long as the why is given, it's been made with the greater good in mind, and in that moment you have the ability to sit alone and be okay with people being pissed at you.
Yeah.
No different than that father is okay with his son being mad at him.
Yeah, because I'm glad you brought that up, because we want people to ask why. As the leader I know that you are, as the leader
100%.
that I am, is like, hey, people are going to be pissed. I want someone to say, like, hey, man, why did you make that decision? Okay, boom, I've got the why, because I've already thrashed it. You know what I mean? Because especially big decisions, like, yep, thrash. And there's been times making those decisions. Obviously, decision then implies action. Action is taken. Sometimes I've found that those decisions were wrong. But as a leader, I have to make those decisions, as we have, but always explaining the why. And then owning it, obviously, as far as us, never blame game, but that's
obvious to us.
And
it's a severe shortfall in a lot of places.
Because some leaders that we've seen is like, to be questioned, it's because they're weak ass leaders. But to be questioned is like, you're questioning my authority. You know what I mean? It's like, and for us being like solid and leaders in who we are, it's like, no, man, we want you to question, because that keeps us in check too. because we're not perfect. You know what I mean? And to put a leader on a pedestal would be the stupidest thing you've ever done in your life. And I've done it. You know what I mean? I've done it because they're humans, man. You know what I mean? Like they always say, like, hey, don't ever meet your hero. You ever heard people say that? You know, because what you find out is that they're human. You know what I mean? I've put them on this pedestal and stuff. But I mean, the older I've gotten, the more experience and everything, you know, it's like, hey, I understand that people aren't perfect. You know, I'm going to still have people not on pedestals, but held in high regard, but also knowing that, I mean, they're human. Like, they have shit going on in their lives. They have tragedies happen. You know what I mean? Everything happens. And for me to expect them to be, like, on all the time, not in the human experience.